Started with the actual talking about stuff that happened at one point that wasn't now. Um, does anyone have any questions regarding your papers? No? Everyone's good? Not that I would probably use lots of good words unless you go to U of L, it's like three.
Where's that quote from?
Yeah? It's from Mean Girls. Yeah. So you guys talk all the time. All right, I'm going to assume by the silence then that you guys are totally cool with your paper. You have no questions at this time. So I will say then this: if you come up with any questions that you're like, oh, I need to ask him something, feel free to ask me something. Ask me all the things. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. We're going to cover all of Chinese history in about 15 minutes. Not possible. Seriously, I took a class in college that was an entire semester with over 100 years of Chinese history. And it was like one of the most difficult classes I've ever taken. Well, to be perfectly honest, it's because I'm like, it's just a whole different place, you know, culturally, linguistically, it's just utterly foreign to Western understanding. And whenever you're going into the quote-unquote Oriental studies, which is what the whole subsector is called, which is actually funny because it's really not an accurate term. Anyways, um, it it's a commitment because learning about an entirely different culture takes a lot of dedication. Even things like certain historical idioms, things that are repeated. Like, how I keep talking to you guys about, like, we keep seeing the Roman Empire everywhere. Everywhere we talk about Europe, it's like the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, Roman Empire, okay? That's a Western thing. All of our law, all of our everything kind of goes back to the Romans. China's sort of the same way for Asia, especially East Asia. India kind of influences South Asia. But regardless, that's what we mean by cultural hearth. So a couple things you guys need to know. A sphere of influence, indemnity, and extraterritoriality. Hey, one of those words should seem familiar to you already. I talked about that before. Do you guys remember that one? Which one I'm talking about? Which word I was talking about? The one that I mentioned before? The word that you've heard before? Now? Yeah. I get it. Okay. I'm just going to keep saying things. What does extraterritoriality mean?
It's like alien.
No. Extraterrestrial is what you're thinking of. But kind of, it kind of fits actually strangely into the whole alien question. But we'll get to that really tomorrow. But extraterritoriality. Extraterritoriality is the right to obey the laws that you are, of the country you're from, rather than the country you're in. Consider this. If you go to a foreign country, you're totally susceptible to their laws, whatever their laws may be. If their laws have it that if you have blonde hair, you get stoned to death on Sunday, that is a possibility, whatever. But if that was the law of the land, that's the law of the land. It doesn't matter if it's right or honest or, biased. It's the law of the land. There's no help for you. Extraterritoriality means that the laws that you have back home supersede that of the country you are in. This would be very, very important for British whenever they went places because basically they didn't want to be held to what were considered inferior tribal customs. But also it kind of had a more sinister connotation because basically you'd have British appointed governors, things like that, who would break the law and get away scot-free because any judges that they would be tried by were back home in England and they didn't really care about what was going on. So the writ of extraterritoriality is kind of an important thing we're going to talk about. The other thing that it is it grants the right to have military bases wherever you see fit. So this is one of the ways that imperialization occurs is you defeat somebody in a war or force in some way the rid of extraterritoriality, then you get to put your military bases in their country, and now they can't get rid of you. So it's a way of sort of spreading. It's sort of like being a virus, actually. We'll talk about the others here in a bit. So here's a few wins. So we're talking China, basically 1839 up until 1911, looking at a couple revolutions that are going to occur. You might remember the last time we talked about China, we looked at the Manchu and the establishment of the Qing dynasty, I believe it was. And basically, what's going to happen is we're going to see a theme happen. And we see this throughout the quote-unquote Eastern world, ever from the Ottoman Empire to Japan. The question of how to reform. Basically, it becomes pretty obvious once you interact with the Europeans that they have better technology. They've gone through the Industrial Revolution before anybody else has. And so then there begs the question, how do we catch up? How do we become competitive with the Europeans? And so there's really two schools of thought here, which is traditional reform or non-traditional reform. If you look throughout history, generally speaking, whenever a country relies on traditional reform, which is basically doing things the traditional way, the old-fashioned way, it doesn't work out so well for them. Consider this. If you guys are going to make a major decision in your life, which school to attend, which job to go into, what kind of car you're going to buy. How many guys are actually looking at cars now? Hey, nice. Where do you find out, where do you get advice about what type of car to buy, or what school to go to, or whatever else? Google? Because no one ever lies on the internet. Craigslist?
Yeah.
Nice. All right, go to family, maybe go to friends, or you seek an expert, something like that. Yeah. All right, let's talk about this. Are your friends a good source to rely on for life advice? Should you listen to your friends regarding life advice?
Of course, some like the same age as you.
They're the same age, so what?
They might understand where you're
They might understand where you're coming from.
They might be smart and
Smart, mature.
or like having an open-minded friend could be like it would help out with that a lot.
They can help you with the emotional things for sure, but forgive me, can they offer you very good, solid advice?
Probably.
Probably how?
They use good grammar. Really good grammar.
Good grammar makes you right? That's probably a new fallacy of logic. I'm not saying they're terrible. I'm saying they're limited. Consider this. The answer is it depends. It depends on what you're doing. If you're talking about like buying a car, it depends if your friend has experience. Yes?
You go to them and say, I'm buying a car, what kind of car, like, what kind of car do you have? Would you recommend that one?
You can ask them, okay. But they only have experience as to what kind of car they have, yes?
Exactly, that's what she's asking.
Was that a question? Sorry, I
I was
misunderstood.
like asking all of them, if they all have different.
Ah, I see what you're saying. You take a group census. Okay. Well, that might work, but it's limited to the amount of experiences that somebody has, yes? By the way, this is also true for your parents. Consider this. If you go to your parents and say, like, hey, I want to know what type of car I should get, they're going to tell you their experiences with cars, but here's the thing is, beg pardon, they're old. At least older than you are. Their experiences are out of date, especially when it comes to certain choices. For instance, let's talk jobs. Are your parents aware of what jobs are popular now, are requiring?
Yes.
It depends. What is their career? For instance, if your parents are doctors, are they going to know much about the demand for the types of law? No, it's incredibly limited to their area of experience. Furthermore, I find that the older the subject, the less in tune they are to what is modern. for instance, I remember my dad talking about retirement, and like a lot of his experiences growing up, and like what they really need. And like he was telling me the other day, it's like the type of teachers that they're really looking for now are special needs and special ed, things like that. And like, yeah, they just fired like 16,000 special needs people at JCPS. And by the way, whenever I was in college, they were telling me the same thing. Oh, dude, that's going to be special needs. That's what we're really going to need in the future. And they were totally wrong. Which means people I know who have special needs degrees do not have jobs, even though they have all the education they have that, because there's no need for them. The information is out of date, yes? Which of course puts a whole kinds of problems on you guys, because you got to figure out not what jobs are needed now, but what jobs are going to be needed 10 years from now. Which is really hard to do unless you talk to somebody who's an expert in the field, because they can kind of see what the trends are going and can tell you. Does that make sense? Now everyone's bummed out. This is why I heavily recommend when you go to college, you're looking at careers, try to get internships. You won't get paid, but you will get experience. They'll also give you an idea of what a job actually is. Some people enter careers thinking it's going to be one thing, it's totally not. Like one of the things people don't realize when you become a lawyer, most of your time isn't spent in trial. It's not spent in court, it's doing paperwork. Sitting in front of a computer, sitting with a bucket full of documents, and reading, and collecting data, and taking notes. You get paid $90 an hour to do it, but it's still paperwork. This is why they have secretaries and paralegals and folks that can help them out with that nonsense. I think it's something like 80% of their job is paperwork. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for on the low end. Becoming a lawyer can pay off. It depends, though, again, on market factors, but that's not even there. My point is simply going the way things have always been done doesn't work. I remember my dad was telling me about how he had a terrible Volkswagen experience whenever we bought cars. My wife always wanted a Volkswagen Beetle. She loves Volkswagen Beetle. She always wanted one. So guess what? Very first brand new car we ever bought was a Volkswagen Beetle. I now hate that car. I hate that car with a passion because I'm a slightly larger fellow and my knees are up to my and also the fact that Volkswagen are just put together in a really silly way. But right.
I'm sorry.
Yes, it's still not enough. I hate it. She loves it, and she's allowed to love it, but that's her thing. My dad told me that Volkswagens are completely unreliable, never buy one. And then I bought one. And it was fine. Actually, the problem was that it was just expensive to replace parts, things I never had to do it. So. But I digress. The point is from his experience, the older cars were a little bit sketchy, and because of that, he thinks they all are. But that's his experiences. They're limited to what they are. So the same thing can apply to countries. If you try to reform in a traditional way, which you see with the Ottoman Empire, the Janissary Corps, it doesn't work. It doesn't make you on level with the Europeans or whoever else is kind of top of the game. But if you modernize, you can bring us to these types of things. The problem there, though, is what we do with our culture, how do we maintain it? But that's a story for another day. 1839, we talked about the Opium Wars. You remember those? What were they about?
Opium.
Which is? Yeah. Britain was basically the drug dealers of the world. It's not. It shouldn't be funny, but it makes me laugh because people think of Britain as like it's Doctor Who and it's all this quirky humor and things like that. Britain is like responsible for a majority of the problems of the 19th century. It's just hilarious. And it's just like, well, we're just going to go back there and pretend that nothing ever happens. Anyways. But the Opium Wars, the end result of this is going to be an anti-foreigner sentiment, which ultimately results in the Taiping Rebellion. Basically, southern China at the time was made up of kind of the laborer class, and they did not really agree with the way that things were run.
You guys remember when I was saying what the testing system is? Confucianism? Okay, basically China was ruled by educated elites, is the idea. And the testing system was set up, it was based on Confucian ideas. Basically, the idea is set up as a meritocracy. The person who knows the best, who knows the most, can pass the test. Basically, the idea is you have the most educated person in the position of authority. On paper, it makes a lot of sense. The problem that is the system was kind of rigged in favor of the all powerful, and so what happened is the system kind of became corrupt. Southern Chinese didn't really like this, and so the Taiping Rebellion kind of came out of this. It was against what they saw as a corrupt government. It was also against religion. Specifically, it was led by a guy, I forget his name. Basically, he thought he was the brother of Jesus, and the younger brother. And he said that he basically was a Christian movement against the Confucians. They actually succeeded for a while. They had this empire for a little while, but eventually it was sort of reintegrated back into China. It's this big moment in history, but it's going to be a first of a series of rebellions. We have the Boxer Rebellion, we talked about that. And basically, again, it comes to an anti-foreigner sentiment, specifically coming back to here with the first Sino-Japanese War. And that's going to be significant a little bit tomorrow because we're going to talk about Japan. But basically, here's what happens. Japan was forced to open its trade ports because of the Americans coming. They, in turn, realized they need to modernize, and so they westernized at an incredibly quick pace. Like within 50 years, they were conquering European nations. So they kind of flipped the tables on everybody. So they ended up attacking China and forced trade concessions on the Chinese, such as the favored nation clause. You guys know what a favored nation clause is? Okay, basically what a favored nation clause is that whatever nation gets it is going to get first dibs on the finest trade goods. They're going to get the sweetest deals. Basically, they're a favored partner in all trade relations. It's something you really want if you're an imperialist power, because again, it's really all about trade. It's really all about money. But anywho, this again led to a popular rebellion. Specifically, it was against the English, and basically it was sort of like a little world war. It was the English, the French, and I believe the Japanese, maybe the Russians, I can't remember if they were involved or not, sort of forcing trade concessions on the Chinese. And it gets its name because it was a popular rebellion. Basically, the idea is that the Chinese government disallowed people to own weapons. In fact, there's actually kind of an interesting thing about where Tai Chi comes in from that. You guys are familiar with Tai Chi, I assume? You guys are familiar? It's actually martial arts. It's used for fighting. It's blood at one point. All the maneuvers in it are actually hidden as a form of exercise because the government disallowed the practice of martial arts at the time of its same basic idea, but it was a weapon without, or a fighting style without weapons is the idea. Because weapons were disallowed, at least to some extent. So the revolution occurred, and basically the Chinese lost again. So this ends up resulting in the Chinese Republic being established in 1911. However, it's going to have its own problems as well. Basically, there's three factions that are fighting it out. And ultimately, Mao Zedong and the communist forces are going to succeed in setting up the People's Republic of China, which is what we have today. So we'll talk about that.
All right. I'm not even going to try to pronounce any of these names because I'll get them wrong. These folks have kind of an interesting story. This is more or less the royal family, excluding the guy at the bottom here, who was in control of China at the time. And what's interesting is the Empress of China, this lady up here, she was a very conniving person. She was very interesting. Basically, she started a fairly low position, one of many women in the emperor's life, and ended up making herself, through her political maneuvering, essentially empress. let's say de facto empress. She wasn't technically the empress, but like what happened was is that she got this guy. My thing's not showing up. This guy in the middle got him appointed as the new emperor of China, and she was actually her nephew. And what happened was is the two got along okay, except that the so-and-so empress, she was initiated in traditional reforms to try to fix some of these problems that occurred due to these conflicts. The emperor, though, this guy in the middle, he wanted to reform completely differently. He wanted to do non-traditional reform. Specifically, he was kind of thrifty, you might say. He didn't want to spend a lot of money, so he wanted to save as much money as possible, building up the economy. Furthermore, he wanted to make quite a few changes, getting rid of the traditional system and basically ousting a lot of those who had been in power for, in his mind, too long. However, these were all supporters of the empress. And so they kind of had a power struggle brewing. And what's interesting is the emperor was actually betrayed by one of his generals because he was organizing a modern military. And this was found out. The empress put the emperor under house arrest, and under sort of a technical situation, he still remained emperor, but he really didn't do anything from that point on. Interestingly enough, he died literally the day before she did. What's weird about that is she was, I think, at the time, like, I think she was in her 80s, I can't remember. He was 37. So this was like why did he suddenly die? So they did an autopsy on his body and discovered that he had arsenic levels 1,000 times higher than the normal human body has. You guys know what arsenic is, right? It's a poison. He was killed. I wonder who did it. There's actually two theories. One is the general who betrayed him, because he knew if the empress died, his protection would disappear and he'd be killed for treason. But all signs kind of point to the empress, because she appointed someone else to be emperor. And how could she have done that if she didn't know that he was going to die? I wonder. So odds are good she killed her nephew in order to place someone else on the throne. After that, though, I forget there's one more emperor, but he's not in charge for very long before there's a revolution and the Chinese Republic is established. Here's some pictures. And again, let's look at the changes in what they're wearing. Do you notice the difference? Yeah, how so? And that's the whole idea, is it's westernized as much as anything. Now, there's more than one reason to westernize. One of the things we have to understand about how leaders dress, they dress to show power. For instance, what does the President of the United States tend to wear? A suit, yeah? What kind of suits? Right? Who else wears expensive suits? What? People with money, right? Because money is power in this country, yes? Business people, right? What if you, okay, let's talk Russia, for instance. All right? What does Vladimir Putin wear? Crazy stuff? Like what? He's wearing, like, a sumo wrestler costume? He's wearing, like, a luchador mask? No, he's wearing suits, guys. Because that, again, is now the article of clothing that projects power. You know what used to project power? Military uniforms. Look at almost every other leader around the world in the 1900s, and you'll see folks wearing military uniforms. That's because military might is right. That started to change, though, in the more modern world. People wear whatever projects power. Let's talk isolationism. Isolationism is a concept that basically revolves around two thoughts. One is protection of one's territory. The other is not getting involved in other people's nonsense. For instance, do you guys know why we got involved in World War II? Why did the U.S. engage itself in World War II? No idea? What about World War I? Okay, let's talk about why people go to war. Okay. The idea in the United States was that everyone else is crazy in the world, and we should just leave them alone to be crazy. Let's not get involved in other people's affairs. Let's not go try to police the world, for instance. Does that sound at all familiar? Because that's isolationism right there. It's like, let's cut ties with other countries, let's not deal with them, let's not do anything. Many countries in East Asia had this policy, but by no means was they the only ones. In China, this was partially due to a feeling of cultural superiority, but also it was due to a sense that there was really no need to interact with the rest of the world. It kind of goes back to the voyages we talked about earlier, but basically, there's nothing that the Europeans had the Chinese wanted. All the Chinese products were superior to European products, even with industrialization. So basically what happened is the Europeans, specifically the British, forced the Chinese to trade with them and basically started selling opium. Now, opium is incredibly addictive stuff. Let's talk about what we use it for today. First of all, you guys know where opium comes from? Yes. Does that mean if you eat a poppy seed bagel, you're going to get high? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But the thing you have to understand is most drugs are things that occur in nature just strengthened to crazy amounts. For instance, is caffeine a drug? Yes. One other thing that's interesting about drugs, they are all poisons. Can you die from drinking too much caffeine? Yes, absolutely you can. Now, how much caffeine, might you ask, would it take to kill you? More than you could probably drink in the form of a caffeine soda or coffee or anything that's a natural delivery system. You want to die by caffeine poisoning, you're going to have to go find pure caffeine, the chemical, and ingest it directly. Spoonful of caffeine in the morning. By the way, somebody has actually done that. They tried snorting it, and it killed them. Yeah, that'll mess you up big time. Don't do that. You could. I don't know why you'd want to, but no, I'm not talking about coffee beans. I'm talking about they purified the drug in extracting it from plants and then gave the purified form. This is true for every drug pretty much. That at least has a basis in nature. Methamphetamine's not so much, but pretty much any drug you can think of at a small level won't hurt you, but whenever you start purifying it, that's when you run into trouble. For instance, chewing on a coca leaf, you'd be fine. Snorting a line of cocaine, you not so much. The coca leaf is where you get cocaine from. Now, poppy gives us all kinds of drugs, everything from heroin to codeine. Some of them are effective painkillers. We still use morphine in the hospitals today. It's a great drug. Problem is, it's addictive. What's that? Morphine? I mean, it's effective, But here's the bad side of these types of things. As I said, they're terribly addictive. You guys know the #1 addictive drug in the United States today?
Crack.
More like a branch of drugs, to be honest, not one specific. But it's prescription drugs. More people are addicted to those than anything else. Trust me, I know. My wife's a pharmacy tech. She deals with it all the time. Or at least she used to. She not so much in the hospital anymore, but she'll have people like, yeah, I used a month's prescription of codeine in 2 days. Can I have another one? How about no? Yeah. Does it mean they're taking all that? Probably not. Probably some selling going on as well, but, still, it's dangerous, The thing is from an unscrupulous standpoint, getting people addicted to things is fantastic. If you're a merchant, you want to sell stuff to people, getting them addicted is great. Ever wondered why it is that there's so many fruity alcoholic drinks and so many fruity types of cigarettes and things like that? It's not adults that are smoking them, let me tell you. It's kids. Yeah. And once you're addicted, you're stuck with it. Now, let me tell you from experience, these things, the truly insidious thing about addictions is people not being aware that they're addicted to them in the first place. For instance, my wife's uncle, he is an alcoholic. He actually works for Alcoholics Anonymous now. He's a speaker. I believe he's 23 or 25 years sober. He's what you call a high-functioning alcoholic. He used to run marathons. He'd drink a keg of beer beforehand. It's 48 beers or so a day. Yeah. The thing is, if you just stop, it'll also kill you. That's the other thing. This is one of those things that if you're not aware you have a problem, you don't try to fix it. That's one of the first points of Alcoholics Anonymous. But from an unscrupulous standpoint, as we pointed out, drug dealers, like the British, didn't want this to happen. They want people to be addicted. So by introducing something that the Chinese would have to want, they ended up creating the need or desire for a product. Of course, this had catastrophic effects throughout China. In fact, it got so bad in some places, it was particularly bad in trade ports. You might be familiar with Shanghai. There's actually a term in sailing circles that meant to be Shanghai. Basically, it meant to be pressed into slavery whenever you went to an opium den. This wasn't necessarily because it was all in Shanghai, but that was because the drugs in general were associated with Chinese. Sort of like marijuana was associated with Mexicans. So what's interesting is if you look at the United States, Great Britain, there were no drug laws of any kind. You could take whatever you want as much as you want. It's your problem if you get addicted. The first drug laws in our country were established to try to promote racism, specifically to try to keep the Chinese from immigrating and to keep the Mexicans from immigrating. It was thought if you don't let the drugs in, they won't come either. I'm dead serious. You can look this stuff up. But in any case, I'll show you an opium den here in a second, kind of give you an idea. This is not the nicest area. And basically, the Chinese fought to try to curb this problem. Yes?
Wouldn't it, not solve that problem about keeping the Chinese out? Because if they just, smuggle drugs and contact somebody who lives in the United States.
Well, yeah, it was a terrible plan anyways.
Okay.
But add on to that fact, it's horribly racist. It's like, well, you're Chinese, therefore you must smoke opium. What kind of thing is that? You're Mexican, you're obviously doped up. Clearly that's racist as all get out. It's just kind of like, the thing is that there was so much racism in the U.S. It's like unbelievable amounts of racism, like super racism. Most people tend to think of the Ku Klux Klan, oh, they're racist, and they were, but, they weren't the only ones. Like, it was commonplace to be racist. It's just like stuff you would not believe. Anyways, opium dens, right? So these are kind of skeezy places. Essentially, they were kind of like bars. They tended to be lit kind of with a red light. You might have heard of a red light district. This is an area where you could find drugs and prostitutes, all kinds of things. All the cities had them. Anyhow, the term Shanghai came from what would happen at some more unscrupulous opium dens. Basically, whenever someone's high on opium, they're kind of caught in a feeling of euphoria, but they're also completely incapacitated. So some people woke up and they found themselves chained to an oar and would be essentially enslaved for the rest of their life. Some women ended up being prostituted. This is, by the way, also in New York City. And some ended up being sold into slavery. So generally speaking, it was pretty nasty stuff. Finishing up, let's talk spheres of influence. So, a sphere of influence is basically a area of control. Think of it like gang turf. European powers would use their militaries and the writs they are able to exact through their victories to sort of carve out turf that they kept other Europeans from becoming involved in. Now they controlled this either directly or indirectly. You guys remember what that means. But ultimately, the sphere of influence that they set up wasn't so much about controlling the countries in it, but rather about keeping the Europeans out. So this was a game of geopolitics. Now, we talked about all that. We talked about all this already. Why am I going to talk to you guys about? I guess we're kind of stuck, aren't we? What was I going to tell you guys about? I forgot. Oh, I remember now. Indemnity. An indemnity is a payment that is given to a country that basically is to pay for all the war expenses. The idea is wars are expensive as hell. So if you can make your victim, if I can better word, the guy who loses, pay for your expenses, that's great. This is important, the reparations. This is going to be used in a number of different conflicts. It's going to cause some problems later on. But the other thing is Hong Kong. Hong Kong is kind of an interesting place. It's technically part of China, but the question is it a country or is it not? Kind of no, kind of yes. It's no because it's part of China. It's yes because technically it gives its own passports. If you actually look where Hong Kong is, if you want to go from one place to another, from China to Hong Kong back to China, you actually need to get 3 different passport stamps. Because it's kind of strange like that. Sort of like going to Puerto Rico is in the United States. Is it part of the U.S.? Kind of yes, kind of no. This is because Hong Kong was part of Britain until the 1990s. Like I remember when it was no longer part of Britain. And it's like, we think of imperialism as being this thing that happened a long time ago. Not really. I mean, it wasn't too terribly long. And the world is still reeling from the impacts of imperialism and colonialism. But I digress. That's mostly it. I do have one more political cartoon I want to show you about the attitudes we can kind of really garner from the age of imperialism. But to finish up, again, really kind of the themes we're exploring are traditional versus non-traditional reform, as well as the means of imperialism in the late 19th century. This is all going to be very, very important as we get into global conflicts. We're really starting to get into a world of geopolitics. If nothing else, the Boxer Rebellion shows that, involving all these different countries and all these different stances. But we're going to hit even more as we get into the 20th century. Any questions that you guys have? Okay. Any questions about your paper? You think anything? Yeah.
I do that paragraph. And when is that even
Let's say Friday. That good for everybody? Turn it to me about Friday. First sentence, first paragraph, I mean to say of your papers. By Friday. You will have a quiz on Friday, covering all of chapter 12. Yeah. What about it? I gotta figure out what's going on this week. Right now, my brain can't handle too much planning. I'm just, like I said, I'm still coming off and it's cold. I'm just like, oh my god. But my head's full of circus peanuts. Once I get that sorted out and figure it out, if nothing else, what I'm going to do is, even if we don't have the tea party, I'm going to have you guys just bring in snackies and have snackies last day. What I might do, I'm not saying this is the plan, we don't plan on this, but what I might do is say it's Friday, we'll take the quiz, and we're going to eat snacks, we're stuff. But we'll see. That sounds cool? Political cartoon time. You guys cannot see that. Never mind. None for you. You can look at it online.
Why is that picture so terrible? Anyways. Alrighty. Well, that's it for today, guys.